Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Riley K. Jones. I'm a writer, teacher, and author tuber, and today we're gonna finally talk about my August book reads. But let's talk about some of the books that I read this August, and there is a variety of books. They're not all YA thrillers. So first book we're going to start off with is White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. So this book is more of a YA horror book, and I didn't really realize that when I was looking into it. I was just like, oh, this is intriguing, and I do not do horror very well. I can barely do YA thriller. Yeah, I do love YA thrillers so much, but there's something about horror that I'm just a scaredy cat. So I walked into the book knowing it was gonna have some more of those thriller moments, and there was still mystery involved, but it was definitely more of a YA horror book, and I did really like the book a lot. So we find out that Marigold, she and her family are relocating because her mom was able to win a sweepstakes to be able to live in this house for a year while her mom writes her next book. That's part of the contract, and she's able to live and have this beautiful home all for free. And Marigold is a recovering drug addict, so she really dove deep into weed and other drugs as well, and so she had to go to rehab, and that is kind of where we find her. She's doing better. She's out of rehab, but the rehab money has really hit her family financially. And her mom has remarried, and he had a daughter that he brought along with her. And then Marigold also has a younger brother, but they are kind of happy together. Marigold doesn't love her new stepdad, but is recognizes that he's good for her mom, but it's really the stepsister that she kind of butts heads with a lot, especially because Marigold is a teenager and her stepsister is in elementary school. So there's a lot of disconnect and distrust between the two of them. And that kind of sets off our story, and then we get to this place and all the other homes are on the street that are abandoned, burned down, they're crummy, except for the house that they're living in. And so then it takes place into a haunted house type of vibe. And oh my word. So I was legitimately scared during this book. And I can read YA thriller and not feel super terrified, but I felt terrified in this book. There were so many times where I had to shut the book and close it because I was like, oh my gosh, and my heart is racing. This is freaky and creepy. And there were times where I was joking around with my husband and I was like, I want to put the book in the freezer, kind of like what Joey would do from Friends. I really wanted to do that. I couldn't read the book and I couldn't read it alone anymore. I had to be in a room with somebody because I was so freaked out. But I loved the book. I probably won't go back into any YA horror just because I know that was not for me. I could not sleep for that night when I finished it. But that's another thing. I read this book in 2 days tops, just crushed it out of the park. I was just absorbed. Tiffany Jackson does such a great job with her books that I'm absorbed and I'm inside that world and I can't put them down. So kudos to her. I know that some people did not love the ending. I have two things with the ending. I liked the story. I liked the twist a lot. I did wish there was an epilogue. So I did feel like it cut off way too soon and I wanted an epilogue, just 3 more pages to kind of bring about a better resolution, because it ends on a very not resolved note. It was just very there was some resolution but not a whole lot, not as much as I wanted, and I heard some other complaints similar to that on Goodreads and stuff, that it was just, I wanted an epilogue too. I'm like, it just needed that. So unless there's going to be a sequel or she releases something later, or maybe the publisher was just like, no, we need to cut it here. I don't know why there wasn't an epilogue, but it definitely needed it. So highly recommend that book, especially because it's spooky season. Check it out. The next book that I am going to be talking about, it's actually not a YA thriller or YA and anything, or even fiction. It was an essay, Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. I kind of read that as like a, we're going back to school, so let's get a little more scholarly read in there. And it was a highly good book. I just did listen to an audiobook. I want to re-listen to it again just because I don't think I caught everything that I needed to from that book, but it was definitely impactful and inspirational. Highly recommend checking out The Abolition of Man and the different perspectives and challenging ideas that C.S. Lewis brings to the table in the conversation of just what is going on, especially in education. It was more of an education book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I definitely need to reread it and recheck it out just to absorb some more, because a lot of his essays are very lofty and they pack a punch, but there's a lot of information in there. So it's definitely something you have to kind of reread and reread, but you get so much out of it. So I highly recommend The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. The next book that I read is actually a book I did for research purpose, and it is fiction, but it's adult fiction. So I don't read a lot of adult fiction, but I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt in kind of a research thing to help me motivate, like what vein of dark academia do I want to target, and some of like the themes. And I heard a lot of people recommend this kind of being like the startup or one of the foundational books for dark academia. So I read that book. Now, I did listen to it on audiobook, and I checked it out from my local library, and holy cow, I have some thoughts. One is the audiobook was 22 hours long. Most books that I've been like listening to or like reading, they're more in the 4 to 8, maybe like 15 hours length, and then just be like, here's a book that you have to read or listen to in the next 2 weeks. Good luck. Like 22 hours, even on like almost double speed, was very hard. So that's my like biggest complaint about the book, was it was just so freaking long. But there was some really cool things about the book that I did like, and I can see why so many people love this book. So just a little backstory about what is The Secret History. The Secret History is a book about some college students who attend a college in, I think it was Hampton, Vermont. Yes, Hampton, Vermont. And the main character, Richard, he's telling the story, and we kind of already know that in the prologue, in the very beginning, which this was another thing I didn't love about it, is that he and his friends kind of killed their other friend. So they kind of just allowed him to fall off a mountainside, and it was like purposefully like, we're killing you, but we're not physically killing you. We're gonna let the mountain terrain kill you. So that you already know that going in, and then it kind of jumps back into the past of what leads up to this moment. And so Richard joins this new college, and he's trying to fit in, and there was this one, he already took Greek a lot and ancient languages and wanted to improve upon his Greek, so he wanted to take this one Greek class, and it was with one of the professors whose name was Julian. I forget his last name, but Julian was the professor, and he was a kind of a different professor. You couldn't just opt to take his class. He had to choose you to take his class, and then it was done in a very classical style, which I don't mind. I think we really need to jump back to the classic style of teaching with a lot of Socratic discussion and all that stuff. So then it kind of jumps into that vein. But then after that, it just kind of was random snippets of their life leading up to the end of the school year. So, and leading up to the murder, and then leading up to the school year. And they weren't like random, they were like chronological things, but there was a lot of narration that I think they could have cut out to help with the book pacing, because I felt like it took away its pacing. But if you're like all into that, like that's your style, like you're gonna love that. Richard kind of narrates a lot of different parties that he goes to, and it's a lot of like telling you what happened rather than showing you. But then when they do get to the moments where it's like a scene, there is a lot of showing. So it's just this awkward, because it was written in the 80s and it takes place in the 80s, but it was published in the early 90s. So I think there's just a little bit of like difference in verse and prose that I think we are probably used to. Maybe that was the reason why, or maybe just like because I like YA and not adult as much, so maybe there is that difference. But Richard kind of tells you a lot of things that were happening and going on, and then there was just like a lot of random scenes. So I think like that was my biggest issue with the book, was mostly the pacing and the fact that you were told that Bunny dies is, I feel like, such a spoiler, and I don't like that about the book. And I guess because it was also too not so much like thriller detective-y type of thing, and that's why she could tell you could like spoil that twist, because it's not really a twist. It was more of a tragedy in a ways of like the way that it was set up. I think there were some, like, again, there were some really cool like parts to the story with like parallels to classic literature, the way that it was written, and like the idea of like tragedy and the Greek tragedy and like the peripeteia and hubris and all of that, like that stuff was there, which was really cool, but it was just like really long. So I think like the best part of the story though was definitely the halfway point. So there's like part 1 and part 2, and I really think that like part 2 was so much better than part 1. Part 1 was so much more of like just telling you things, allowing a few scenes to happen so you understand their reasoning of why they murdered their friend, and then the other half was a lot more showing an interaction between the friends rather than like this golden era and like let me narrate to you how we're all feeling. And like, so that's one of my biggest pet peeves about the book, was just the pacing and narration at the beginning. But the second half was definitely a lot better. And like, I don't know, there's some things I don't agree with, but I don't think the purpose of the book was to get you to agree with you on the philosophies. I think that was just to show their hubris and their errors. So all in all, it was a fun read. It was a long read, so if it's something you're into, like, it's a long read, and I can see why it does have some some endearing characters that you do connect with. So it was, I think I rated it a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, because again, those little things just annoyed me, but I was invested in the story. Like every time I came back to it, I was excited about reading it. So again, I think it's just because as an adult, like I don't love adult all the way. I have a few genres that I go to in adult, but I like the YA telling of stories. There's just something beautiful about that for me. Like that's just my vibe. So those were the books that I read in August, and definitely recommend checking all of those books out. They were really, really fascinating. And I wonder if you guys have read any of those books, what did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, please make sure to give this video a nice big thumbs up. It lets me know that you like videos like this one. And if you haven't already, click subscribe. I release all new videos on all things writing and reading every Thursday. Thanks again so much for watching. Keep writing, keep reading, and stay creative. Bye!